Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining in. We have an amazing set of panel today going forward. But just to set a little bit of context for uh, why we're doing this and what all of this is leading up to. So if you can just check out, we're celebrating Startup September, which is a month-long celebration of the startup ecosystem by the startup ecosystem and for the startup ecosystem. So we're bringing in partners from different industry, different verticals, giving them visibility, having a lot of capacity building programs. We're also conducting cohort-based courses for different industries like D2C, fintech, consumer tech, and Web3. We're also doing specialized course for enablers of the ecosystem, because if we empower the enablers today, the impact that's going to be in the ecosystem in the next 5 years, 10 years is going to be massive. And just a little bit introduction about Headstart. I'm sure that you've been attending these sessions now that we're halfway through September. I know every day from 5 to 7, 7 to 8 is your time. And, I see a lot of people joining in again every day. So thank you for, trusting us with your time. And just to give a little bit background about Headstart, we started back in 2007. We're an early stage startup community. That's how at least we started. But today we're present in more than 23 cities, enabling the regional ecosystem in each of the cities that we're present. And this is only because of, the sheer strength and power of our volunteers. So we're primarily volunteer with a very lean team at the central level. And all of these volunteers work as, ninjas in each of their ecosystem to really help the startups, work with the regional partners to, strengthen and make the startup ecosystem robust in their region. So it's always good to give a shout out to our volunteers, because we're very grateful for the work that they've been doing. And since Headstart's also completing 15 years this year, we're celebrating it in a big way. We're hosting our annual conclave HSX in Bangalore. Now, without further ado, I'd like to start with today's session, and which is on Agritech, which is really the sector to focus on for India. And we're going to be talking a lot about why Agritech is important and how technology is empowering the next wave of Agritech startups. And to discuss that today, we have with us Mr. Hemendra Mathur, venture partner in Bharat Innovation Fund. We have Mahesh, who's the co-founder of Bijak, and we have Hiren Doshi, who is VP Partnerships and Ninja Ventures. And we have an amazing moderator with us, Mr. Durga, who is the CEO of Atal Incubation Center, Nalanda. And I'd just like for Durga to take over and start the session now.
Thank you. Thanks, Sonia, and team of Headstart, and we all being a part of the Headstart Hub network. So good evening, and to all who have tuned in to today's panel discussion. And interestingly, it has been on one of the topics that is very dear to the heart of the citizens of the country. And India has been always an agrarian economy of its most substantial kind. And this has been a great venture once again to see that startups have also ventured into this, and not just flourishing, but have come out of with glory colors. So it's great that Headstart has thought of one such panel over this that is on Agritech Empower. May we have the privilege for a final introduction round to begin with. And I would like Mr. Hemendra Mathur to start from. Hemendra-ji, we had recently gone through a wonderful article that has come up in Forbes also. So taking the points from there, you mentioned about 4 dimensions which a startup needs to think around if he's into the agri-tech sector. majorly being about the size of the farm, the levels of supply chain, optimization of natural resources, and themselves becoming profitable. How do you see the entrance of these agri-tech startups uh, coming into the horizon of the startup ecosystem, and what's the way ahead? What's your take on this?
Thanks, Durga, and thanks to the Headstart team for having me in this discussion. So, to your question, I would say, of course, agri-tech has come a long way in last 10, 12 years. Uh, and the credit goes to the entrepreneurs who sort of, build interesting models around farmer access to markets, farmer access to inputs, data, advisory, credit. And what has been demonstrated that yes, farmer is ready to accept, and not just the farmer, the entire value chain from agri input dealers to wholesalers to sort of aggregators to processors to distributors, and even banks and financial institutions. I think they are also large customers of many agri-tech solutions. So I think there's a clear demonstration. There's a clear demonstration of scale too, that these models are scalable. I believe the penetration of agri-tech is still under 5%, and if there's a large headroom available for startups to scale. Also, interestingly, this is one of the sectors where no one startup can monopolize. So there's opportunity for hundreds and thousands of startups to build models across geographies, across crops, and also globally. I'm a firm believer Indian agri-tech can travel distance, and it can go to Europe, it can go to Southeast Asia, it can go to Africa. I think some of the models are very relevant there. So I think clearly, there were a lot of question marks whether agri-tech is a fad or it's going to stay. I think the answer is it's going to stay forever. And it's much needed. I firmly believe that this is the decade of agriculture. I think, and agri-tech has power to solve for a lot of challenges that we see on the farmer front, on the environment front, and stuff like that. Now, I think what need to change? Of course, there are challenges. And as I mentioned, and as you rightly pointed out, demonstration of unit economics, because ultimately that is the core to any sustainable business model, right? And that's why I've been pushing a bit of some of the entrepreneurs who have really scaled up to look beyond GMV, And as an investor, I also take the blame that, we've been behind spoiling a lot of discipline among entrepreneurs to run after the top line. But I would say that time has come where we demonstrate strong margins, especially gross margins in double digits, and hopefully build a profitable business which can sustain on its feet. You need not be raising round after round. I know how much time and how frustrating it is for entrepreneurs to go from A to B to C to D. That alphabet never ends. So I think to make the model sustainable and hopefully prepare yourself for listing, especially, we have likes of Bijak, like probably a couple of dozen startups who have reached that stage where they should be thinking about listing, because that seems to be the obvious or the most likely exit for a lot of investors who invested in the sector. And I firmly believe that the real value can be unlocked once you list, and you can really keep on growing it further. So yeah, I will stop here and we'll get other panelists to talk about it, and happy to take more questions from you.
Thank you so much, Hemendra. I would come again to Mr. Hiren Doshi. So your journey with Ninjacart has enabled many to revamp the supply chain and address the need of providing end users the fresh produce market. So what was the idea over getting into such kind of business chain where there are challenges with the elimination of the intermediaries and bringing out a considerable behavioral change in the market also? So how was it about starting with Ninjacart?
Yeah, so thanks, Durga. Ninjacart started about 7 years ago. In fact, not too many people know this, but we started as a consumer brand, delivering fresh to actual end consumers. And within 6 months, we realized this market is overcrowded, overfunded, and there is no sustainable business model at that point of time. So very quickly, the founders understood there is a bigger problem to be solved, which is essentially trying to optimize the supply chain and bring a lot more efficiency between farmers and the retailers, basically trying to eliminate a lot of inefficiency which happens through leakage, wastage, lack of value addition, rent seeking by a lot of middlemen. That was a hypothesis that, hey, there is at least about 20% to be made if you are able to make this entire supply chain efficient. And along the way, leverage or use technology to make this a lot faster, scale faster and quicker. And that's what Ninjacart kind of managed to do as well by buying from farmers and delivering to retailers within 12 to 18 hours, right? And having the fresh produce, which was harvested from the farms, and consumer being able to consume within 12 to 18 hours. Now, this has taught us a lot of lessons, by the way, right? In theory, all this sounds excellent. That, hey, you bring in technology, you start buying from farmers, give them an app, give an app to retailer, and cut down all the efficiency in middle, and you will make great gross margin, as Hemendra was just saying. But when you start working and actually start realizing the value addition actually being done by the middleman, not everything is replaceable. It was a very humble learning that a lot of these folks whom we are trying to eliminate are actually entrepreneurs. These are not other traditional companies whom you can disrupt using technology. They add tremendous value, right? And hence a lot of effort now, besides trying to make that farm to retail business more profitable rather than just going after the GMV. A lot of effort now is that how can we actually build a business, a sustainable business, by taking everybody along. Every single player in agri value chain has earned their position by adding value in the entire value chain, and it is not to be ignored. So it's a great learning, and today we are kind of building a platform where everybody can participate in the platform and grow together with us.
Thank you, sir, so much for the introductory note over how you have actually disrupted this entire value chain. We come to Mahesh. Mahesh is from Bijak. Mahesh, my question would be to you on a kind that Bijak's intervention has also seen some of the developments on the trading platform, basically, that Bijak offers. But how prepared do you feel is the agri-tech startup sector or the agriculture sector per se for such kind of interventions into the trading sector as of now?
Sure, Durga. So, Hiren's last point of, actually paved the way for, explains why the Bijak's business model is actually very crucial. Given some of these multiple, almost 40 to 4 to 5 million middlemen act as a micro entrepreneurs. So Bijak, we as a platform kind of enable them, bring out the good players in this ecosystem, and build that liquidity, build that marketplace so that they can trade with each other in a better way. If we look at the agri space, right, we try to take a few steps back and look at a very pure macro way, in a very crude way. There are three essential building blocks. On the first building block, there are multiple startups or companies trying to make the productivity better, make the yield better, etc. On the second building block, there are participants who are trying to get into the trading business, who are basically setting up their own infrastructure and other things. And on the third side, there are various enablers, whether it's the marketplace companies or whether it's the warehousing companies, or using various levers like credit, logistics, storage, etc. Now, all the three need to work in tandem. Usually in any sector, if you look at the other sectors in India, usually the market linkages or the liquidity platforms appear first. That enables the second building block, more and more participants to join the platform. And then eventually, given the healthy competition, given more and more free cash flow generation happening by the participants, that is invested back in the yield and productivity, which goes back to the first building block. Now, of course, besides these three main building blocks, there are other agritech startups in the and other life sciences, alternative proteins, and other areas. Those are ancillary areas. But I'm just saying these three building blocks are highly critical. We as a Bijak participate in the last building block, being that enabler. because that is the first, we believe that that's the first important point for any sector to flourish. And that will also enable, more and more participants to join, create a healthy competition, create more transparency. And yeah, we stuck with that particular thesis the last 3 years, and that's what we have been doing.
Great to know this. And taking from there, Mahesh, what do you consider? You of course spoke about the building blocks and where Bijak is playing an intervening role. But how do you see that? What are the biggest challenges or barriers coming up in the agri-tech sector?
Of course, one of the points what Hemendra spoke about is the shift from growth stage to monetization. Given in this sector, there was some important point in one of the podcasts I heard, like what really matters in a company's journey is not the growth rate in a year, but the number of growth years you have in the life of the company. So in the case of agri, given the massive market, we are less than 5%, maybe $10 billion overall market. It's still a very decent, decades of growth available for these various startups, right? If the investors are patient and everything, the agri is a very slow moving sector. It would take years, maybe 5 years or 10 years. And most of the startups might have negative free cash flow. But then after that, once everything, gets optimized, all the building blocks are formed, it will lead to more decades of, 4 to 5 decades of positive high margins, free cash flow available. So that's the advantage. It's just that the challenge is it's a slow moving sector. There are the best of the best talent working on it, best of the, robust technology people or operations folks or, some of the good entrepreneurs are working in this space. It's just that it would take time and everyone needs to be patient rather than imposing, immediate results.
Yeah. So this gets me back to Hemendra ji. In this scenario where we are seeing that the agri-tech sector is a kind of expanding in terms of the accommodation that is giving to the various kind of tech-related startups and also on the value chain and supply chain management. So, but I think still the concerns of the investors remain intact. So if you can throw some light on that what are the major concerns of the investors in terms of agri-tech startups?
First of all, I'll say that the investor scenario has changed for good, especially in COVID times. I know till 2017, it was only impact investors who were investing in the sector and everyone else thought it's super risky, right? So I think at least that perception has changed in last 3 years. In the COVID times, our food and agri economy grew despite other sectors taking a hit. I think it's a miracle that a food supply chain was running in the COVID times, and I would give a lot of credit of that to the partnership approach between the government, the industry, and the startups and the ecosystem. So clearly, investors all look. This is one of the sectors which has resilience, right? And of course, it's a growing sector. Food consumption today is $700 to $800 billion. We're going to cross $1 trillion in next few years, and the food and ag economy is going to be significantly large going forward with huge opportunity for value addition, branding, stuff like that. So I would say investor perception has changed for good. Out of the $3 billion that Agritech received till date, I think almost $2.5 billion has come in last 36 months. So you can see there's a mindset shift. There's a more, I would say, inclination to invest in the sector. A lot of mainstream investors are coming. A lot of investors sitting who even don't have an office in India investing in the sector, which is also remarkable. But having said that, yes, there are concerns. I think one concern which usually investors have is policy. So this is all said and done. Agri is one of the sectors where policy will remain critical. But the good news is whether it's the central government or the state governments, I think they understand that, anything which is benefiting farmer, they should facilitate that change, right? So to that agri-tech, I think is something which has found favor even with the government, right? Of course, there could be some short-term policy risk, export of wheat, export of rice and all that, which have other sort of reasons. So, but I think in long-term, policy is going to be very conducive to agri-tech. Second risk, which I think is bigger risk and agri-tech should try to address and solve for it, is environmental. I think the climate change that we are seeing, not just India, I think across the world. We've seen drought in the northern and eastern belt, and which is causing shortage of almost 10 million ton of rice, as we go along in this monsoon season. During harvesting of wheat, there were like 10 days where the temperature was 4 degrees higher than normal, and we lost, I think, 5 to 8 million tons of wheat. So just imagine the impact of climate on this sector. And that's where I would say, though it may be perceived as a risk, but it is also an opportunity for Agritech. Now, how do we solve for climate? And that's why we are seeing a very fundamental shift from Agritech to climate tech, or climate tech becoming more core to the entire Agritech story, solving for water table, solving for soil moisture, solving for soil health, which is in bad shape. How do you correct the NPK? How do you improve microbial activity in the soil? How do you improve the micronutrients within the soil? How do you predict pest attacks and stuff like that? So there's a lot you can do on the climate front, which I think is a bigger risk and a bigger opportunity for Agritech. Last but not the least, and I think Mahesh talked about it, is the patience. This is, of course, VCs are investing in it, but frankly, I believe if you really to unlock the value, I think it's minimum 10, 15, 20 years journey. For an agri-tech to go to a village and build that trust with farmers is not going to be easy. Look at any large brand in fertilizers or agrochemicals like Savifco, DCM Shriram, PI Industries, Bayer. They took decades, to get to a stage where farmers start trusting them. For an agri-tech, be it Bijak or a Ninja or anyone, they're new players, and it will take some time for developing that trust with farmers, right? Even if you go through intermediaries, and I think Hiren pointed out very well that intermediaries are important. How do we use them as channel partners for taking these agri-tech solutions to farmers, so that you build that last mile connect, you build that trust among farmers that this solution is going to work. So I think that's where investors need to be a bit patient. And it's unfortunately a lot of funds are structured as 5, 7 year, 8 year, 10 year fund, which I think is completely disconnected from the reality. I don't think even a lot of urban centric models can give returns, reasonably good returns within that period. Forget agri-tech or rural tech. So I think that is something which we should think about.
Absolutely. Very well put it. Hirenji, if you would like to add something to that, and also on the aspect of that, when we talk about empowering the agriculture sector altogether in India, it doesn't come only with agriculture. It has to be a holistic development. As Hemendraji rightly pointed out about climate tech, it may be rural tech. It is also about the sustainable solutions that we are bringing into that segment. So how do you see the growth of this segment and empowering the farmers also?
Yeah. So first of all, let me start by seconding what Hemendraji just mentioned about building trust being so vital in the sector which we are operating. It is not enough that now the smartphone penetration in rural is 62%, and now every farmer has a smartphone in the house, and you start expecting that they will start interacting with you digitally and not knowing who you are. It is extremely crucial to build that trust with them, and only then they will start trusting the technology which you bring in terms of interacting with them. In fact, even today, even when we have large presence in large mandis in India, we are contemplating actually opening a physical point of presence, just so that the traders whom we deal with actually trust who Ninjacart is. We may think sitting in Bangalore that everybody knows us. Not everybody knows us. It's very, very important actually. And then you see the results. So for example, in our business from farmer to retailer supply chain for fresh, today 100% of orders which we receive are actually through mobile phone. But it took 5 years to build that trust with retailer. In the early years, even though the same app was available, but the orders were always taken by call center guys or the sales guys. And today, now the trust is established. So it takes a lot of patience. Now, coming to your second point, that what are the other things which needs to be developed for the agri sector? So, we all know about precision farming and all this stuff. I'll probably talk about 4 points which are slightly abstractic in nature, but I believe this is a great opportunity for agri-tech sector in future. First is emergence of alternate data for decision support. See, lack of digitization or lack of digital or structured data is hampered the growth of agri-tech for a long time. And emergence of this alternate data set, for example, satellite data for crop management, lending, monitoring, insurance claims, etc., is phenomenal. And that basically helps you leapfrog and not depend on how can we try and digitize or how can you try and manually gather this data, which helps you reduce the cost of service delivery drastically. Second is innovation in credit distribution and collection. In my view, so far, I think we have not done enough in innovating and creating products, credit products, which are actually required by the agri sector in general. Apart from, of course, the government effort in making this available to farmers. So seamless access to credit in form of embedded finance, I think, is extremely crucial, and we will see a lot of interesting things coming in that side, which allows the cash flow to manage the income cycles of various actors. And the third is the digitization of commerce. Today, commerce in agri still happens in a small trusted networks. And this has prevented India from becoming one big market. And it may not still happen overnight. ENAM is one of the initiatives which is aimed at trying to make one big market for any farmer in India. However, we will see probably a lot of action in companies trying to build small trusted networks, but at scale across the country. That could be very interesting. The last point, I truly believe, I think there is a lot of disruption opportunity in making India as a agri export powerhouse. Today, we probably are punching below our weight when it comes to exports. So platforms which facilitate or make global trade a lot easier, search, discovery, commerce, guarantees, etc. I think we will probably see a lot of action in that. And all of this, which I mentioned, has a direct impact on farmers as well as the other ecosystem players as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hirenji, on that. Mahesh, if you can also throw a little light on that, where we are talking about this sector contributing such largely to the economy, and the reach out to the farmers have been multifaceted, maybe from the various sectors in the startup ecosystem or from the government side, where a lot is to be done and a lot of is being done. So do you still believe that there's a lot to be done to reach out to the farmers and address their issues, those who are in the remotest part of the country? How far have we gone to solve their real issues?
Yeah, of course, there is this trickle-down effect, whether the companies or startups are dealing with the farmers directly or indirectly dealing with the enablers, whether the FPOs or the aggregators in between. If the benefit is passed on because of the startup's efficiency to the stakeholders in the system, the FPOs or the aggregator, they eventually, the benefit trickles down to the farmers in their particular regions, etc. This is one aspect. Like, of course, this trickle-down effect. Some companies are dealing with the farmers directly. Some companies are not dealing. In both the cases, there is the impact being driven. It's still at a very smaller scale. Even when we look at the export, global export house, what Hiren was speaking about. For example, if you look at the potato export, almost 200,000 metric tons is exported from India out of 50 million metric tons of production. And countries like Pakistan, Egypt, Lebanon, they export more than 1 million metric tons because they use the Dutch and French-based seeds, the Monsanto and the Sante kind of seeds, which basically gives them an opportunity to actually sell. Getting the certification is easier. Indian farmers are ready to do those things, ready to invest 1 rupee extra to source those particular seeds, but they don't have those linkages. Like, their question is, even if I end up spending more 1 rupee on sourcing this particular seed, would I have enough liquidity to sell it to the other markets? Would you be able, enable me to do that? Likewise, if we look at the bananas export thing, we might export about 150. We export about 150,000 metric tons out of 30 million metric ton production. And again, countries like Philippines or Ecuador, they do almost 3 million metric tons of export. Although we have the same labor cost, same productivity and everything, but still we are less than 5% of those countries. Again, the reason being the linkages are not well defined. And that's what even at Bijak, right? We have built the domestic linkage system. We know how to build the technology, how to build the process, how to build the reliability index, and trying to use the similar kind of methodology for other markets, for other geographies.
Yeah, definitely. Because the sector have been expanding into other markets so rapidly worldwide. So there are a lot of policies, and also the food policies coming across have been a boost to that, but very little, very late. So someone who has observed this very closely, Hemendraji, we also see a merge of agri-tech and the fintech sector coming together, where financial boosts have been repeatedly trying to encourage this sector of agriculture. So how do you see this kind of merger happening between agri-tech and fintech startups, where capitalization of the farmers has been also a challenge, and how are the startups dealing with it?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. And there is, I think, a lot of intersection between agri-tech and fintech. On the PSL lending target for the financial is over $220 billion. And if you add value chain financing, capex financing, clearly annually you can disperse maybe $500 billion. So the size of opportunity is huge, right? But why it's not happening, why it hasn't happened? In fact, banks feel quite nervous lending to farmers and the value chain, given the risk, etc. And the branch banking hasn't, of course, this has worked, but not to the extent that we wanted, right? I think what has Agritech done, and I think Hiren pointed out that, is digitization. So data about the farmer, the farm size, the crops which are being grown there, you can capture a lot of this data through satellites, through smartphones. And it's not just static data, it's dynamic data. You can even monitor crop health. So that's the underlying asset for any banker, right? If you're lending against crop. So I think that is fundamentally changing how lending to this sector is going to happen, right? Because then you don't need a branch network, you don't need a lot of documentation, and a lot of it can be done digitally. The reason banks have been hesitant, because for a 50,000 loan, you're incurring a cost of 5 to 10,000, right? That makes the loan, non-workable from the day one, from the time you disburse. How do you reduce that cost, transactional cost of giving loan to a farmer to maybe 500 rupees or maybe 50 rupees, right? I think that's where the change is going to come, and that's where this whole data piece. So data may be captured for some other reason. It may be for giving advisory to the farmer, it may be for a input player, it may be for a processor, but essentially the same data is useful for the banker as well, right? So I think it was an interesting exercise that I did over the last 2 years. State Bank of India came to us to ThinkAg and asked, how Agritech can participate in the lending process. And we introduced multiple startups to them. And of course, it was a long process. There were a lot of iterations. But finally, they selected 23 startups whom they want to pilot. And as we speak, those pilots are underway. How Agritech can make farmer onboarding efficient, how Agritech can build models for risk assessment, risk mitigation, and also for loan recovery, right? So I think for agri fintech to go to the next level, I don't see that happening without participation of mainstream banks. That they have to come in, right? And they have reasons to come in, because, as I said, the data is available, and still large section of smallholder farmers are underbanked or depending on informal sources, where the cost of capital is at another level altogether. And of course, government also realizes that with 30%, 40% interest rates, farmers are not going to make any money. So I think that marriage is started to happen. I would say still early days. Banks expect any agri-tech to give entire solution, right from onboarding to documentation to risk measurement to all the way to loan collection. I don't think startups have reached that stage, right? So I think that is
the kind of arrangement that banks normally make with the startups, also considering them also as one of the other enterprises and putting them under the burden of the heavy rated interests, with again documentations in terms of DPRs and very elaborated exercise that they do. So do you think the agritech startups would accommodate that space with this financial component?
They do. I think they also have a compelling reason. Look, when you sell to farmer inputs, you make some margins, depending on the category, maybe 5%, 10%. When you buy staples from them, you make another 2%, 3%. And that frankly doesn't really add to the unit economics. It adds, but it doesn't create the unit economics. So they also have a reason, compelling reason, that they earn some sort of spread by giving loan, by facilitating loans to the farmers.
Yes.
So I think there's a clear intent for these platforms to ultimately converge to fintech at some stage. I think the mistake which some of the agri-tech did in this process was to start loaning from their own book.
Correct.
And whether we like it or not, most startups don't have underwriting skills. I think underwriting is a very different set of skills, and I believe that unless you have a banker as a co-founder or someone who is very strong banking experience, at least the risk on the risk side, let's don't do it. So I think that is one disconnect, because a lot of founders who've really gone to Series C, Series D, it's very difficult to accommodate a banker as a co-founder at that stage. So I think so these are some of the challenges. But having said that, given the opportunity, I think a lot can be done, not just on farmer financing, even value chain financing. I think that's another big opportunity, like Samunati, Avanti, who demonstrated invoice discounting at a very large scale already for FPOs and other supply chain players. Another opportunity in waiting, I personally believe there is need for creating a lot of on-farm infrastructure, be it a micro warehouse, a microprocessing unit, a dehydrator, a bulk cooler, typically 1 to 5 to 10 lakh kind of a range. And there's not a ton of money available there. And that physical infrastructure is really critical to improve the farm economics. Digital is good, but that need to be complemented with more physical infrastructure. And that's where
more physical infrastructure.
Yeah. And that can't scale without financing. I think one big story, one positive story is this funds coming from AIF, which government has set up, Agri Infra Fund, which gives concessional loans for setting up infrastructure at the ground. I think that has really, at least some of the models have pivoted because of that, because we are seeing creation of these infrastructure at the farm level, and that can really be very large. And lastly, the financing to the ancillary sector, dairy, cattle financing, huge opportunity. I think buying a cattle is a big aspiration for a lot of farmers. One is tractor and second is cattle. Two things for sure I know farmers really love to buy. But where the financing is available, answer is really not, right? And then there's fishery, there's poultry. I think there's so much opportunity in financing some of those assets, and I won't be surprised that 5 years down the line, a lot of agri-tech have a fintech as a very sort of integral component of the business model.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. So, Hirenji, what's your take on this? When we talk about allied practices around agriculture also, and there are NTFPs, now the FPOs coming into the space, and many micro entrepreneurs and the cooperatives already pre-existing. So, how is this entire value market in agriculture is redefining itself? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so, Hemendraji kind of touched upon this, but the way we look at it is in an agri industry, the produce changes hands 4 to 6 times depending on which commodity it is. Right? While we say that agri GDP is 400 billion, 500 billion, actually the opportunity for financing is 4 times of that, because every hand it passes through, there is a credit cycle involved. When farmer sells to trader sells to destination trader, wholesaler, retailer, every time that produce moves, there is an opportunity for financing, because every value chain has a credit cycle embedded in this. Today, I think the biggest issue in making this really scale is, first is lack of digital data trail. A lot of the cash flow based financing which you see in other industries, thanks to the GST registration and a formal way of getting invoices, does not exist in agri, which is a big impediment. Now, how can we create a standard infrastructure where we create a unified, commonly accepted entity as a common infrastructure, which allows this to mimic what we are not able to do from GST point of view, becomes very, very important. Second is, today the physical documents still play a very, very important role, because that's how banks are tuned to in terms of underwriting. How do we make accessible alternate data, which I explained earlier, in helping them evolve alternate underwriting algos, and this is where Agritech unfortunately will have to take the first step and take a lot of risk on themselves to prove that it actually works before banks start believing that and start taking risk on their books. So this is where a lot of Agritech end up taking the first step, even though we may not have a banker as a co-founder, but we still have to figure out a way to actually build some of these models which works and prove how it works. So we are very excited about the entire OCEN infrastructure which is getting built, which is the Open Credit Enablement Network. I think this definitely will democratize and also create a lot of innovation, the type of products which are made available to the entire value chain players in the ecosystem. Otherwise, most of the options available to value chain players are your typical term loans, etc., which sometimes does not even match the cash flow cycles of the value chain players. There is a lot of innovation required in what kind of products can be made available, which amplifies their ability to do business in a very trusted way without raising a lot of interest rate. Because today in agri, while we claim that the formal credit is replacing the informal credit, but even the formal credit is upwards of 20 to 28% in most of the sectors, which is actually not very cheap. So there's a lot of work required in this space.
Yeah, definitely. And with the kind of heat that this government has always faced in the agri sector reforms that it has always tried to make, digitization of this entire domain is one again big challenge of the data coming up in some digitization format for the farming community. One last question before we take the questions from the audience to you, Mahesh. What do you think is of prime importance, the technology or the impact? Basically I wanted to ask that what is of the prime importance, the technology that the agri-tech startup brings to the sector or the market adaptation from the end users?
Sure. So see, the technology adoption, at least 3 years back, it was more, just to give an analogy, it's more like when you try to take a new house or buy or rent a new house and try to park your car in the basement. The first few times it's really frustrating and you wonder, you get lost in that particular thing. But after that, it just becomes a subconscious activity. So this is what happened with our customer base also. Like the first few times it took them a number of transactions to get used to, and then it become very automated. So yes, technology is very important. There are if I look at the top 11 companies in the agri-tech space, there are almost 1,600 plus engineers, designers working on it. We did this small, just out of curiosity. And if I look at similarly in other sector like neobanking or something else, there are around 1,400 people, right? Although it's a more technology heavy kind of sector, the neobank, but still agri has more engineers. So a lot of these good engineers working and being attracted to this particular sector definitely helps. I mean, you need that tech focused on building high robust data centric. Like we have more than 50,000 customers, we have almost 300,000 transactions happening on the platform. Each and every transaction generates enormous data, and trying to make sense of that particular data, building the recommendation engine actually needs a lot of technology requirement. That's where I think tech is definitely very much needed. Adoption happens, that's a byproduct of the tech asset.
So there we come to the questions that there has been in the Q&A box. And if Mahesh, you can address this question to you, that from the adoption issue only. So let's take it from here. That is, the trading between a trader and a farmer is done on quality of grains also. How do you ensure that part of?
Just to understand this, is this in agri?
Smith Mehta.
Yeah, so in generic in agri industry, it's happening on the basis, of course, the trader is in the closer vicinity of the farmer space, so they are able to check the quality and other things. And in the case of grains, the parameters are very minimal. Like if you talk about the maize, there are a few 5-10 different types of varieties, super VD, BD quality, or otherwise. In the case of FNV, the quality constraints are more dynamic. Like there are that's something much chaotic than the grain space. In the case of grains, given the vicinity of the trader and the farmer, or the clear transparency of the quality, the way the quality is defined on the grains, it's easier to trade on the case of grains. I hope that was the question. I mean, that's what I sensed. Maybe that's the question Smith was trying to ask.
More of the engagement that we talk about. Is again this question about agri-fintech companies. What may be the possible reason that we are not able to understand?
Okay, if I understand correctly, why agri-fintech has not grown, is that the question? Okay. Yeah, I would say it's even agri-tech is very, very young. We are at a toddler stage. I think for agri-fintech to mature, I think it is going to take some time. We are just at the beginning of this whole digitization drive right now, right? And for agri-tech to understand what data points a banker is looking for, it takes some time. And as I mentioned, for it to scale, you need participation from mainstream banks. And that has started, I would say, in last maybe 24 months, right? And they are also figuring out how to work with agri-tech, how to change their legacy systems, as Hiren was mentioning. Their way of underwriting, their way of evaluating is going to be different with the way the data is coming from agri-tech. So they also need to change, right? They need to integrate some of these algorithms into their sort of legacy loan evaluation processes. So I think it's a matter of time, and it's a large sector, and there are multiple kind of financing. And I think Hiren also pointed out that we don't have innovative products. The product design itself for credit is kind of missing. The credit which can be linked to inputs, the credit which can be done in an EMI form, or how to bundle insurance with credit and all that. So I think there's a lot of work thinking which needs to go into developing new products which are more relevant and more aligned with the crop cycles and the market needs. So yeah, I think that's my answer. We should be a little patient. I think these are very, very early days in my opinion.
Yes.
Maybe in 5 years you will see a lot of change happening. So
Absolutely.
Just wait and watch.
Yes, definitely. But in that case, what are the other futuristic sectors around agriculture that you would like to point them out?
Yeah, for example, I mentioned climate tech. I think that's going to be very, very important. After the kind of capital is going to be somewhat different. I believe there's need for more catalytic capital than venture capital. But having said that, I think that's going to be one focus area. Second diversification that I see is agri-tech to rural tech. Can agri-tech also serve the non-farming needs of the farmer, right? So like non-farm income for farmer is already 60%. And so I can assume there'll be a lot of non-farming needs of the farmer, and there are players like HESA, Frontier Markets, who are already started to do that, bundling other products and services. So I think that's another area. And I would say ancillary industries. I think if you look at the size of dairy industry, I think it's almost 200 million tons of milk, some $150 billion. And if you look at the number of dairy startups, as a proportion of agri-tech startup is 5 to 10%. So it's completely disproportionate share of ancillary tech startups in India, be it dairy, be it fisheries, be it poultry, be it fiber-oriented startup, we have likes of Resha Mandi, etc. But I think that segment has to be built, and there are enough white spaces. And the last point I want to mention, I think a lot of work has happened Mandi onwards, right? I think the white space that I see, which is of course a difficult space, is farm to Mandi. The collections, the transportation, the logistics, the price discovery, the payments. Still farmer is selling at the Mandi closest to him, and usually at the price, at the harvest price, which is the lowest. How do we empower farmers to figure out where to sell, how to sell efficiently, and how to build logistics? I think logistics is a very integral component, and how to ensure payments are done in a very transparent and efficient way. I think that is a much bigger opportunity, in my opinion, which I'm sure some startups are going to crack someday.
Yeah, absolutely. With this, let's conclude the session with a last round of comment on this, that we are talking about increasing efficiency of the farming domain, the agriculture domain, and also doubling the income of the farmers with new technologies, organic farming, and various methods of institutional methods of empowering the farming community has come up. So, gentlemen, all your concluding remarks on this. Can we start with Hirenji?
So I'm not an expert in organic farming, so I'm going to reserve my comment on that. But from a concluding remark point of view, I think the importance of agri cannot be overstated for a country like India, and for a country to achieve economic security, welfare objectives. Agri industry has to grow tremendously for us to even become a 5 trillion economy, right? It's very, very important. Any progress in agri output, efficiency, productivity has a large scale direct impact on large population of the country. Now, the good news is for Agritech is country has invested in building a lot of interesting public digital infrastructure like the identity and the payment stack, and there is a lot more coming our way. This helps in creating a fantastic launchpad for Agritechs, not just to launch, but also to scale once they have figured out a product market fit. So, according to me, this is a beautiful time. It's a very ripe time for interested entrepreneurs to actually look at agri very, very seriously and not just jump into social media or e-commerce, which is a go-to sector. This is a great time, and we have fantastic investors like Hemendra ji and others as well, who continuously guides young entrepreneurs and help them avoid a lot of mistakes. See, agri is very unique to India. There is no playbook for agri-tech players. We have created our own playbook by learning and making a lot of mistakes. And that's very important to understand, unlike a lot of other industries where there were established playbooks where a lot of people just brought it to India and customized it to India. It was not a copy paste, but still a lot of stuff was already proven in other markets. Given the unique nature of agri, there is no playbook available. And it's very important that we as an ecosystem create a forum to channel a very unified voice, which demands policy stability, which demands whatever infrastructure we need to imagine from ground up, which actually can foster the growth of agri-tech in India. I think this is something which we will all jointly have to build. It's going to be very important for future of agri-techs.
Mahesh. Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. Mahesh, your take on this? A quick comment.
Yeah, I feel there are multiple agri companies that will be working collaboratively and creating impact in their particular segments, or it's a huge market, still wide open for multiple entrepreneurs to come in and also innovate on new ancillary sectors, etc. So I guess that's my conclusion.
Thank you so much. And Hemendra ji, lastly, your comments and a question attached from the Q&A box, that how could startups reach out to you for a pitch to be shared or an funding request to be made?
Come on, it's very easy. You can ping me on LinkedIn or send me an email or just call me. So, and that's what really motivates me personally. I have a policy is never say no to an entrepreneur, and I think it's quite fascinating, just to talk about the opportunity which Hiren and Mahesh talked about. Is the number of new startups which are coming is mind-boggling into the sector. So of course there are a lot of tech entrepreneurs, and of course we need a lot of tech mind which can challenge the conventional agricultural problems. But also I'm seeing sons and daughters of farmers. They're coming into agri-tech now, which is so heartening because they've seen it from the childhood, and they have a different appreciation of the problems which their father and grandfather faced. And even people returning from Silicon Valley and
and getting down to the farm fields,
getting out of the farm fields. So I totally echo what Hiren said and what Mahesh has also said, that this is the sector of future, and clearly there's no playbook, and that's where I firmly believe on collaboration. I think some startups made the mistake of building everything on their own. That's not a right use of the capital. How do you collaborate? You need to define what your core is, and whatever is peripheral, which is important, by the way. It's not that peripheral is less important, but someone can do credit better, someone can do input better, someone can do data advisory better. Just tie up, I always tell to all my startups, they have this concern, they will learn and compete. And in this market, don't talk of competition for the next 10 years. We'll compete in 2030, but till then, let's collaborate, partner, not just among startups, but with agriculture universities, Krishi Vigyan Kendras, panchayats, local village level entrepreneurs, state government, district administrations. I think all have a role to play, and that really brings a lot of efficiency into the model. So yeah, that's my piece of advice to entrepreneurs on the call.
Thank you so
Durga,
much.
If you don't mind, I just want to add one more sentence to this. Actually,
please.
When we set aside certain corpus for Ninja Ventures, and just made a call to all the entrepreneurs in the agri sector, if anybody is interested, right? We would love to understand and possibly invest. Within, I think, a duration of 1 month, we got about 800 companies in early stage agri-tech who showed interest. That just shows, and we were so delighted that, okay, finally the depth is building, although half of them were in the idea stage and the remaining ones in the startup and growth phase. But this was so humbling, and a lot of them actually are sons of the soil. That the father was a farmer, the son did an engineering in city, but then wanted to go back and actually do something about the farming community. And that was so amazing to actually see, and the passion with which they try to solve this problem, I think is just amazing. So yeah.
Absolutely. That's very encouraging when we see that the young generation or the upcoming generation takes it up as a sunrise sector. So thank you everyone, Hemendraji, Hirenji and Mahesh, everyone, for making another special evening at Headstart Startup September. Vanya, any concluding remarks from your side before we close the session?
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for the session. I think it was a very engaging one, and I thank you for answering all the questions also so patiently. And I think, I personally got to know a lot more about Agritech than I did before the session. So thank you guys, and looking forward to hosting you again sometime very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone so much, and to the lovely audience there. Of course, we were not able to take a few questions probably due to the paucity of time. But would happy to take them again on a similar session. Thank you so much, everyone.